You're listening to Radio France International. It's just coming up to 50 minutes past the hour. Now, you probably don't know this, but it's almost exactly 150 years since the first mass bicycle ride took place here in Paris. More than 100 people pedalled from Paris to Versailles, that's a distance of about 20 kilometres, on vélocipèdes. They were the early versions of the bicycle. And the fastest of that group of bike riders took about an hour to finish the race. This weekend, a group of enthusiasts are setting out to do that same bike ride to mark the 150 years ago. One of them is the researcher David Herlihy. David's here with me now in the studio. Hello, David.
Pleasure.
What's this bike ride going to look like this weekend? Will you be on normal bikes, old-fashioned bikes? Are you amateurs, professionals?
Well, I'll be honest, I suggested this commemoration. However, I wasn't part of the organization. As Paris Vélocipèdes is behind it. And I'm honestly not quite sure what to expect because the weather calls for rain. But I hope we'll get a kind of eclectic group like the first outing had. I'm sure usually these kind of rides do attract a number of different bicycles, everything from modern bikes. I think we'll have a few hardy velocipede riders as well. So it should be a colorful event.
I don't know what the terrain was like 150 years ago, and presumably it's a bit different now. But what did the bikes look like 150 years ago, the velocipèdes?
The terrain is relatively flat until apparently just before you get to Versailles. There's going to be a little climb there. The original riders did this with machines that weighed something around 25 to 30 kilos. And these velocipedes were, they had solid iron frames and wooden carriage wheels and no rubber tires. And the pedals were attached to directly to the front hub. They were not, however, the Grand B. Sometimes people think the penny farthing, they think that was the first type of bike. And it wasn't. The profile was actually somewhat inviting. There were two relatively same-sized wheels. So consequently, it looked like something anyone could ride, including women. And there were some women involved in this.
I was going to ask you that. When did women start cycling?
Well, they were right here in this event. We don't know the breakdown as far as, but we know there were some women. So we know that the number was approximately 100, and possibly a little more. And probably it was mostly upper-class people, to be honest, because the velocipede cost so much money in those days. You had to have money to buy it. But other than that, it seems to have been a pretty eclectic group, including older people and younger people, men, women, children. There were a few celebrities, apparently. So it was an interesting mix.
Now, I know you've studied quite a bit about the history of the bike. Can we say it was invented by a specific person on a specific date?
I would actually argue that you can. That would be probably another subject. But there was a French mechanic named Pierre Lallemand who was right here in Paris. And we have, I think, pretty convincing evidence in backing his own testimony, which was that he built the first bicycle prototype in the summer of 1863. So that would have been 4 years before this event. And in fact, I think a number of people kind of took the idea and ran with it. Lallemand himself would go to the United States and get the first patent. But I think several young engineering students here took note of the idea and were behind the original Michaud company, which was undoubtedly behind this event as well.
I'm guessing they found it quite difficult to learn how to ride bikes in those days.
Well, that's one of the problems. You've got a host of marketing problems. And that might explain the 4-year gap, really, between the time the idea was demonstrated and the time it really hit the market. So you've got a lot of problems. First of all, there's the image problem. I mean, these are wealthy people buying it. They don't want to look crazy. So the bike itself has to look reasonably elegant. They also don't want to look like they're making fools out of themselves. They don't want to fall down in front of people. And it's not intuitive that you can stay balanced on this thing. So there was a lot of the original Michaud Bicycle Company had quite a few marketing challenges, including convincing people, first of all, that this was a practical idea, that there was something to be gained by riding a bicycle, but also that they weren't going to break their necks, so that it actually wasn't that hard to ride once you got the knack of it. So, yeah, the early ads did stress that they could teach you in a few lessons how to ride.
Now, this bike ride 150 years ago, that was 1867, and I gather that the first Tour de France was held in 1903. That's about 30 years. Give us an idea of how much the bike changed in between those two dates.
Right. Well, so the original velocipede evolved fairly quickly into what we had talked about, the Grand B. So the very important improvements such as wire wheels, rubber tires, configuration changed, which actually made it less attractive. It became a purely recreational vehicle for males for some time throughout the 1880s. And then you had the real revolution in bicycle history when the safety bike, or it's in French called the bicyclette, came about. And actually, it was kind of interesting because it sort of reverted back to the original dream, which was that the bicycle should serve the entire population and should be practical. And the bicyclette was, of course, because it had rubber tires, inflatable tires. It had a chain, so it was the back wheel, not the front wheel, that you steered. So mechanically, it was far superior to the velocipede, but it was very much in the same spirit. So it did take that generation to get from this ride in Versailles to the point where you had something that truly delivered on the promise of a practical vehicle. And speaking of the Tour de France, I would say it's not that much of an exaggeration to cite this event as kind of the inspiration, really, because it was the first time that the public could see competitive cycling. Not that everybody raced. We think only a few did, the ones who made it in only an hour, which was a clip of about 17 kilometers an hour. But it was enough, I think, to excite people about the idea of, to show that bicycle racing could be a very colorful, popular event.
And how did we get from there to every child being able to ride a bike?
Well, it would take time. The price had to come down, of course, and it did. So after the great bicycle boom in the early 20th century, the bicycle, now you have automobiles starting to come on the scene. Price of the bicycle falls dramatically. But that's the point where it actually becomes what it was supposed to be to begin with, which was the people's nag, if you will. And then it became kind of a rite of passage for children to learn how to ride. So all this did happen in time, but I credit the visionaries, really, who I think that what they were trying to do, because this was really the end of the first season of the bicycle. It had just come on the market with the Universal Exhibition in '67, and I think they really wanted to end that year with an exclamation point and to encourage people to get back in the saddle the following year, which they did.
And of course now bikes hugely popular again. They've been given a burst of energy with the green movement, with a rise in obesity. We're all encouraged to get on our bikes. And a lot of cities have adapted to that. There are many, many, many more cycle lanes in Paris than there were. And of course, France was the first country to have rented bikes, the Vélib. Are you a big fan of all this? Do you use Vélibs when you visit France?
I absolutely do. Actually, I want to look into the Gobi. I've seen the new green bikes that I guess you can leave anywhere in the city. I'm trying to. I haven't mastered how to get signed up for that, but I use my Vélib. I'm still a Vélib user for now, but we'll see. I'm looking at my options. But no, I think they're wonderful, and I think if the riders from 150 years ago could come back today, and obviously they'd probably be amazed by all the motor traffic, but I'm sure they would also be reassured to see how the bicycle does have a permanent niche.
Still, all these years on. Thank you very much. I was talking there to David Herlihy, who is a huge bike enthusiast and especially a historian of the bicycle from the velocipede onwards.